In the sprawling, unforgiving expanse of New York lived a young woman named Catherine Stula. To the landlords who hounded her and the strangers whose messes she cleaned, she was nearly invisible, just another girl drowning quietly, her face lost in the crowd, her desperation carefully hidden. From the outside, her life seemed simple: work, survive, repeat. But inside the crumbling apartment she called home in a forgotten corner of the Bronx, a different story unfolded, thick with the weight of borrowed time. Welcome, my beautiful family, to today's story. I'm so grateful you're here with me. If you're new to our community or you've been here from the beginning, I want you to know how much your presence means. We're building something special together, a space where stories of resilience, love, and finding worth in a world that often overlooks us can flourish. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I truly need your support to make that happen. If this story touches your heart, if these characters speak to something within you, please hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not broken, just beautifully real. Every single subscriber helps us grow this family, and together we're proving that there's an audience for stories about people who bloom in darkness, who refuse to be invisible, who find love not despite their scars but because of their authentic courage. Your support means everything. Let's build this community together. Now, let's get into the story. Catherine woke at 3:47 in the morning, yanked from shallow sleep not by an alarm, but by the sound of her younger brother Leo wheezing in the next room, sharp, desperate gasps that stopped her heart each time. She rushed to find him hunched on the edge of his sagging mattress, clutching his chest, his inhaler empty in his trembling hand. His eyes found hers in the darkness, wide with the kind of terror that comes from not being able to breathe. She knelt beside him, pressing her palm to his back, coaching him through the panic with a calm voice she did not feel. Slow, Leo. In through your nose. I've got you. A lie she had told so many times it no longer registered as one. His asthma was worsening, and without insurance, without money for the medication that kept his lungs open, she was watching him suffocate in slow motion. The apartment walls were streaked with water damage. The radiator clanked but produced no heat. Mice skittered freely behind the baseboards. The refrigerator held only a carton of eggs 2 days past expiration and half a loaf of bread she would toast to hide the staleness before giving it to Leo. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of envelopes she could no longer bear to open: hospital bills, collections notices, final warnings. $87,000 in debt. The landlord had come 4 days ago, his voice cold as January wind, giving her 2 weeks before eviction. 3 weeks earlier, she had been let go from her cleaning job at the office complex for attitude problems, code for refusing to work unpaid overtime while her supervisor pocketed the difference. But today, there was work. A last-minute placement through the temp agency for an event at a private estate called the Iron Rose. The pay was triple her usual rate, enough to buy Leo's medication and keep the lights on for another month. A lifeline she seized with both hands, even as dread coiled in her stomach. She had heard whispers about the Iron Rose, that it belonged to people who did not forgive mistakes, people whose names were spoken in careful tones by those who knew better. She dressed in her black uniform, hand-washed in the bathtub the night before and hung to dry over the shower rod. Leo stirred from the couch where he slept, his breathing still labored. "You're leaving," he rasped. "Yes. Just for the day." His face tightened with worry beyond his years. "Be careful, Cat. Those rich people, they're not like us." She forced a smile she hoped looked real. "One shift, Leo. I'll bring home enough for everything. I promise." A vow she had made a dozen times before, each one as desperate as the last. Hours later, she stood in the service entrance of the Iron Rose with 15 other temporary workers, their anxious faces lit by the cold glow of overhead lights. Margot Hale, the head of household staff, stood before them clipboard in hand, her expression carved from ice. "Listen carefully," Margot said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You are here because you are expendable. One mistake, one word out of turn, and you will be removed. No pay. No reference. No second chance." Her gaze landed on Catherine. "Stula. You're assigned to the main floor. You'll be serving during tonight's event. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not look the guests in the eye. You are furniture. Do you understand?" Catherine nodded, her face a mask of composure she did not feel. The event tonight was a masquerade gala. And the host, The man whose home this was Stephen Meyer. Everyone knew that name. The man who owned half the city's underground. The man who had funded the scholarship program Catherine had applied to 4 years ago, before she dropped out of community college to care for Leo. Applications still buried in a showbox under her bed, dreams that had withered on the vine. Serving him now felt like the universe laughing at her. She would be invisible. She would make no mistakes. Tonight, she would do what she had always done, survive. If you want to know what happens when the invisible girl does the unthinkable, when survival instinct collides with a moment that changes everything, stay with me. Because tonight, Catherine Stuhler is about to cross a line no one has ever dared to cross, and live. She was escorted upstairs by a stone-faced security guard to learn the layout before the guests arrived. When the elevator doors opened, Catherine stepped into another world entirely, a world she had only ever glimpsed through the windows of cars she could never afford, in magazines left behind in waiting rooms. The grand hall of the Iron Rose unfolded before her like something out of a gilded dream, but the kind of dream that devours girls like her. The floor was polished black marble shot through with veins of gold, so flawless she could see her own pale reflection staring back at her. A double staircase curved upward like the wings of some marble bird, each baluster carved with roses in full bloom. Chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, not the cheap crystal kind, but hand-cut glass that fractured light into 1,000 colors, each fixture worth more than the entire building she lived in. Catherine swallowed hard, keeping her expression neutral, refusing to let the awe show. She was invisible, she reminded herself. Invisible people weren't allowed to gape. Around her, the household staff moved like a choreographed ballet, silent, efficient, flawless. They spread tablecloths of cream silk that whispered as they settled. They arranged silverware with the precision of surgeons, each fork and knife aligned to the millimeter. Plates rimmed in platinum. Crystal glasses so delicate they looked like they might shatter if she breathed too close. Catherine Stuhler stood in the narrow aisle of the corner bodega, staring at the price tags like they were written in a foreign language. $4.87 for the inhaler. She had $4.20 in her pocket, 3 crumpled bills and a handful of coins she had counted twice on the walkover. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Behind the bulletproof glass, Mr. Rashid watched her with the tired eyes of a man who had seen this scene play out 1,000 times. "I can come back tomorrow," she said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing up her throat. "I get paid tomorrow." Another lie. She had no idea when she would get paid again. Mr. Rashid sighed, sliding the inhaler through the slot in the glass. "Take it. Pay me when you can." She wanted to refuse, to preserve whatever shred of dignity she had left, but Leo's wheezing that morning still echoed in her ears. She took the inhaler, mumbling thanks that felt too small for what he had given her, and walked out into the February cold. The walk back to the apartment took 12 minutes. She counted every block, every step, because counting kept her mind from wandering to the eviction notice taped to their door or the collection calls she had stopped answering 3 weeks ago. The Bronx streets were still dark at this hour, the sun not yet brave enough to show its face. A group of men huddled around a trash can fire on the corner, their laughter sharp and brittle in the frozen air. She kept her head down, her pace quick but not panicked. Panic drew attention, and attention in this neighborhood was dangerous. Inside the apartment, Leo was awake, wrapped in both their blankets, his breath still shallow but steadier than before. She handed him the inhaler without a word. He took it, studied her face, then pulled her into a hug that nearly broke her. "We're going to be okay, Cat," he whispered. She held him tighter, wishing she could believe him. The phone rang at 9:47 that morning, the landline they kept for emergencies, the number she had given to every temp agency in the city. Catherine lunged for it, her heart hammering. "Stuhler," she answered. "Catherine Stuhler." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, female. "This is Vivian from Elite Staffing Solutions. We have an urgent placement. Private event tonight at the Iron Rose estate. Serving and support staff. Triple rate, cash payment at the end of the shift. Are you available?" Catherine's breath caught. Triple rate. That was $450 for one night, enough for Leo's medication for 2 months, enough to buy them time. "Yes. I'm available." There was a pause on the line, the sound of papers shuffling. "Good. Be advised, this is a high-profile client. Discretion is mandatory." Dress code is formal black and white. Report to the service entrance at 4 p.m. sharp. Do not be late. If you are late, you will be replaced. The line went dead before Catherine could ask questions. She stood there holding the phone, her mind racing. The Iron Rose. She had heard that name before, whispered in the kind of conversations that stopped when strangers walked by. It was the estate of Stephen Meyer, the man whose name appeared in newspaper articles with words like alleged and under investigation, but who never seemed to face consequences. The man whose foundation had once represented her only chance at escaping this life. Leo watched her from the couch, his eyes questioning. What is it? She set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. I have work tonight. Good money. His face brightened, then darkened just as quickly. Where? She hesitated, weighing how much truth to give him. An event. Uptown. It's safe. The lie tasted bitter, but she forced a smile to sell it. She spent the afternoon preparing her uniform, scrubbing the collar and cuffs until her knuckles were raw, pressing it with an iron she had to heat on the stove because theirs had broken months ago. At 3:30, she stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back, hair pulled into a severe bun, face scrubbed clean, eyes hollow with exhaustion and something harder. Desperation, maybe. Or determination. She was not sure there was a difference anymore. Leo met her at the door, pressing something into her palm. She opened her hand to find the small silver cross their mother had given her before she died, the only thing of value they had left. For luck, he said. Catherine closed her fist around it, the metal warm from his touch, and stepped out into the cold afternoon, toward the Iron Rose and whatever waited for her there. The taxi dropped Catherine 3 blocks from the Iron Rose because the driver refused to go any closer. That's Maya territory, he said, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. I don't go past the gates. She paid him with bills she could not afford to spend and walked the rest of the way in shoes that pinched her feet, her breath forming clouds in the dying light. The estate rose before her like something out of a darker century, all iron gates and stone walls topped with security cameras that tracked her approach. A guard stepped out of the gatehouse, his hand resting casually on his hip where she could see the outline of a weapon beneath his jacket. She showed him the staffing agency confirmation on her phone, her hands steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. He studied it for a long moment, then her face, committing both to memory before waving her through. The service entrance was around back, down a path lined with hedges cut into perfect geometric shapes. Other workers were already arriving, their faces wearing the same careful blankness she had practiced in the mirror. They were led inside by a woman in a severe black suit who counted them like cattle, checking names against a list with mechanical efficiency. Catherine found herself in a basement room that smelled of industrial detergent and old stone, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as Margot Hale delivered her speech about expendability and silence. After the briefing, they were sent in groups to their assignments. Catherine followed 2 other women up a service staircase, their footsteps echoing against concrete walls. They emerged into a hallway where the world transformed, marble floors, paintings in gilded frames, the scent of expensive cologne and older money. One of the women, a tired-looking blonde named Maria, leaned close. First time here? Catherine nodded. Keep your head down, Maria whispered. Don't look at him directly. Don't speak unless he asks you a direct question. And whatever you see tonight, you forget the moment you walk out those gates. They were stationed in an alcove off the main hall, arranging champagne glasses on silver trays, when Catherine heard the voices. Low, tense, coming from the room adjacent to where they worked. The door was ajar, and through the gap she could see 2 men facing each other in what looked like a study, all dark wood and leather, a fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. One man she did not recognize, heavyset with a face flushed red with anger or alcohol or both. The other stood with his back partially to her, but she knew him instantly from the photographs she had seen in newspapers, from the way every person in the room seemed to orbit around his gravity. Stephen Meyer. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His dark hair was slicked back from a face that could have been handsome if it were not so utterly cold. You're making a mistake, Stephen. The heavyset man's voice carried a threat poorly disguised as reason. My family has done business with yours for 20 years. You can't just. Your family. Stephen's voice was quiet, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. Your family has been skimming from my shipments for 6 months. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't care? He moved then, and Catherine caught her first clear look at his face. No anger there. No passion. Just the cold calculation of a man deciding whether an insect was worth crushing. I don't. The heavyset man's bluster cracked. It was a misunderstanding. We can make it right. Double restitution, I swear. Stephen raised one hand, and 2 men in dark suits materialized from the shadows like conjured demons. You're done, Victor. Your territory, your operations, your protection, gone. You have until sunrise to leave the city. If you're still here when the sun comes up, they'll find pieces of you in 3 different boroughs. Victor's face went from red to white in an instant. You can't, Stephen, please. But Stephen had already turned away, dismissing him with the gesture, checking his watch as if the man's pleading were nothing more than background noise. The suited men gripped Victor's arms, hauling him toward a side door as he sputtered protests that died in his throat when one of them whispered something Catherine could not hear. Stephen stood alone in the study for a moment, rolling his shoulders like a man loosening tight muscles after a workout, nothing more significant than that. Then he turned, and for a heartbeat his eyes swept past the doorway where Catherine stood frozen, her hands locked around a champagne glass. She did not think he saw her. She was furniture, invisible, exactly as she had been instructed. But something in the way his gaze moved through the space made her certain that he saw everything, always, and filed it all away for later use. Maria's hand closed around Catherine's wrist, pulling her back into the alcove. I told you, she hissed. Don't look. But Catherine had already seen enough to know exactly what kind of man she would be serving tonight, and how very easily he could erase her from existence without a second thought. The masquerade began at 8, but the house had been holding its breath since sunset. Catherine felt it in the way the permanent staff moved, quick, efficient, but with an undercurrent of nervous energy that made their precision seem almost manic. They polished surfaces already gleaming, straightened paintings already perfectly aligned, adjusted flower arrangements that needed no adjustment. Fear, Catherine realized, had its own choreography. She was assigned to the upper gallery, a long hallway lined with portraits of stone-faced men who all shared Stephen Meyer's sharp jaw and unforgiving eyes. Her job was simple: stand at the ready with champagne, offer glasses to guests as they wandered between the ballroom and the private salons, remain unnoticed. She took her position near a marble column, the tray balanced in her hands, and watched the evening unfold like a play she had not been given the script for. The guests arrived in masks and designer gowns, diamonds catching the light like captured stars. They moved through the space with the easy confidence of people who had never worried about rent or empty refrigerators or brothers who could not breathe. Catherine studied them from behind her carefully blank expression, noting the way they laughed too loudly at jokes that were not funny, the way they touched Stephen's arm when they spoke to him, seeking favor or approval or simply the thrill of proximity to power. And Stephen, she found her gaze returning to him despite every instinct screaming at her to look away. He wore a black mask that covered the upper half of his face, but it did nothing to diminish the impact of his presence. If anything, it made him more striking, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the cruel elegance of his mouth. He moved through the crowd like a shark through water, graceful and predatory, and people parted for him instinctively. She noticed the small things. The way his hand never strayed far from his jacket pocket. The way his eyes constantly scanned the room even while he held conversations, cataloging exits and positions and potential threats. The way 2 of his men shadowed him at a discreet distance, their bulky frames poorly disguised by expensive suits. He was a man who trusted nothing and no one, who saw every smile as a possible prelude to a knife in the dark. A woman in an emerald gown approached Catherine, plucking a champagne glass from her tray without acknowledgement. Catherine might as well have been a coat rack. She had grown used to this invisibility over the years, had even welcomed it, but tonight it felt different. Tonight she was a ghost haunting the halls of the living, watching a world she could never be part of, serving people who would never see her as human. More champagne in the East Salon. Margot appeared at her elbow, her voice low and sharp. Move. Catherine obeyed, navigating the hallways with her tray, the sounds of string quartet and polite laughter following her like an echo. She passed through doorways framed in gold leaf, under chandeliers that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, across carpets so thick her footsteps made no sound. In the east salon, a smaller, more intimate space, she found Stephen standing alone by the window, his back to the room. He had removed his mask, and for a moment she saw his face in profile against the night-darkened glass. The newspapers had not lied about his looks. He was handsome in the way dangerous things often are, all sharp angles and controlled power. But there was something else there too, something she had not expected. A weariness around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw that spoke of burdens carried alone. He turned suddenly, catching her staring. For a heartbeat their eyes met, and Catherine felt her pulse spike with irrational terror. But his gaze moved through her as if she were transparent, settling instead on someone entering behind her, a man in a silver mask who spoke in low, urgent tones about shipments and schedules and problems that needed solving. Catherine set down fresh champagne glasses and retreated to her position by the wall, heart still hammering. She was invisible. She had to remember that. No matter how human he looked in that unguarded moment by the window, no matter how the candlelight softened the hard lines of his face, Stephen Meyer was not a man to be seen or understood. He was a force of nature in a tailored suit, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. The evening wore on, and Catherine's feet began to ache in her cheap shoes. She watched Stephen accept toasts and shake hands and smile smiles that never reached his eyes. She watched his security detail track every person who came near him. She watched the elaborate theater of power and deception play out in crystal and silk. And she noticed one more thing, a detail so small she almost dismissed it. The way one of the servers, a thin man with nervous hands, kept watching Stephen with an intensity that felt wrong. The way he clutched a specific tray, guarding it, his knuckles white with tension. Catherine filed the observation away, telling herself it was none of her business, that invisible people did not ask questions or interfere. She was here for the money, nothing more. By morning she would be gone, and this gilded nightmare would fade like a dream she had never wanted to have. She had no idea how wrong she was. At 10:30, Margot pulled Catherine from the gallery and sent her downstairs with a curt instruction to help with restocking in the pantry. The kitchens were a controlled chaos of heat and noise, chefs barking orders, sous chefs racing between stations, the clatter of pans and the hiss of flames creating a symphony of organized panic. Catherine slipped through the organized madness, grateful for a moment away from the suffocating tension upstairs, away from Stephen Meyer's cold presence and the weight of all those watching eyes. The pantry was tucked behind the main kitchen, a long narrow room lined with shelves that held ingredients Catherine had only ever seen on cooking shows Leo watched on their neighbor's television. Truffle oil. Saffron in small glass jars. Bottles of wine with labels in French and Italian, their prices probably enough to keep her family housed and fed for months. She began restocking champagne glasses onto a high shelf, standing on her toes to reach, when she heard voices from the other side of the storage racks. "It's done." A man's voice, low and tense. "The Chateau Margaux 1787. I marked the glass with a chip on the base, just like you said. He'll know which one is his, he always drinks from the etched crystal." Catherine froze, her hand still raised toward the shelf. Something in the voice made her skin prickle with warning. "And you're certain about the compound?" A second voice, smoother, educated, carrying the kind of authority that came from money or power or both. "No taste, no smell. That's what they promised. Botulinum derivative, modified. He'll drink it, give his toast, and be dead before he reaches his study. Heart attack, the coroner will say. Massive coronary. Man his age, that lifestyle, all that stress, nobody will question it." Catherine's breath stopped in her chest. She pressed herself against the shelving unit, making herself smaller, invisible, her mind racing to process what she was hearing. "The delivery," the smooth voice asked. "Midnight toast. It's tradition. Meyer always makes a speech at midnight, raises a glass of his private reserve. The 1787 is already set aside in the wine cellar. I'll bring it up myself, make sure it's the one he gets. After what he did to my brother, after what he's taken from all of us." The first man's voice cracked with something raw and bitter. "He deserves this. He deserves far worse." The smooth voice held no emotion at all, just cold calculation. "But this will have to suffice. You have your payment arranged. 50,000 when it's confirmed. Disappear immediately after. Understood?" "Understood." Footsteps approached the pantry entrance, and Catherine moved on pure instinct, grabbing bottles and pretending to organize them, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the Bordeaux she was holding. The thin man from upstairs, the nervous server she had noticed watching Stephen, emerged from behind the racks, his face pale and slicked with sweat. He barely glanced at her before hurrying out into the kitchen. Catherine remained frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs. She waited, counting to 30, before the second man appeared. He was older, distinguished, wearing the formal attire of a guest rather than staff. She kept her eyes down, studying his shoes, Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. He paused, and she felt his gaze sweep over her with the same dismissive calculation she had endured all night. "You." His voice made her flinch. "How long have you been in here?" Catherine forced herself to meet his eyes, channeling every ounce of exhausted indifference she possessed. "Just came down, sir. Restocking champagne." She gestured to the glasses with a hand that she willed to steadiness. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes cold and evaluating. Then, apparently satisfied by her sheer unremarkableness, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the pantry with knowledge that could get her killed. Catherine set down the bottle she was holding before she dropped it, pressing her palms flat against the cool metal shelf to stop their trembling. Midnight. They were going to poison Stephen Meyer at midnight, and she was the only person in this entire house who knew. The only person who could stop it. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to stay silent, to keep her head down, to let powerful men destroy each other while she collected her pay and went home to Leo. This was not her world. These were not her people. Stephen Meyer had sentenced a man to exile and possible death tonight without blinking, had built his empire on violence and fear. Why should she care if his own associates wanted him dead? But her hands found the small silver cross in her pocket, Leo's gift, and she thought about the promises she had made. About being the kind of person who did the right thing even when it cost her everything. About the look in Stephen's eyes by the window, that flash of weariness, of humanity beneath the monster. She had 2 hours to decide what kind of person she was going to be. 2 hours until midnight, and Catherine Stuller had no idea that her choice would change everything. Catherine returned to the gallery with champagne she did not remember collecting, her mind spinning through impossible calculations. She could tell Margot, but Margot would never believe a temporary worker over established staff. She could try to reach one of Stephen's security men, but they would likely shoot first and ask questions later, if they asked questions at all. She could run, collect her things and disappear into the February night, let fate take its course. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Leo's face, heard his voice telling her to be careful. And she knew with sick certainty that if she let a man die when she could have prevented it, she would see that moment every time she looked at her brother for the rest of her life. At 11:30, the guests began gathering in the grand ballroom for the midnight toast. Catherine was reassigned again, this time pressed into service as part of the team that would circulate through the crowd offering final refreshments before Stephen's traditional speech. Maria handed her a tray of crystal glasses filled with champagne, whispering instructions about starting from the left side of the room and working clockwise. Catherine barely heard her. Her eyes were scanning the room, searching for the thin server, for the man with the smooth voice, for any sign of the plot she had stumbled into. The ballroom was packed now, easily 200 people in masks and finery, their laughter growing louder as the alcohol flowed and the hour grew late. Somewhere in this crowd were men planning murder, and she was just a ghost with a tray, invisible and powerless. Then she saw him, the thin server emerging from a side door that led to the wine cellar, carrying a tray with a single glass. Not champagne. Wine, deep red, in a crystal glass that caught the light differently from all the others. Even from across the room, Catherine could see it was older, more elegant, etched with a pattern of roses that wrapped around the stem. Her breath caught. That was it. The poisoned glass meant for Stephen Meyer. The server moved through the crowd with purpose, heading toward the raised platform where Stephen stood surrounded by his inner circle. Catherine's feet were moving before her mind caught up, weaving between guests with their masks and their secrets, her eyes locked on that single glass of death. She lost sight of the server behind a cluster of women in peacock feathers, panic rising in her throat, then spotted him again near the platform steps. Stephen was laughing at something one of his men had said, his mask now removed, his face relaxed in a way she had not seen all evening. The thin server was climbing the steps, the etched glass steady on his tray, his expression carefully neutral despite the sweat beading on his upper lip. Catherine's mind raced. She could not just knock the tray from his hands. Too obvious, too many witnesses. She could not shout a warning, who would believe her? But she had to do something, had to act now before that glass reached Stephen's hand. She moved closer, close enough to hear the server's voice as he approached Stephen. Your private reserve, Mr. Maya. The 1787 Chateau Margaux, as requested for the midnight toast. Stephen turned, his eyes lighting with something approaching genuine pleasure. Ah, perfect timing. He reached for the glass, his fingers inches from the stem. Catherine saw it then, the tiny chip on the base, exactly where the voices in the pantry had said it would be. A mark so small no one would notice unless they were looking for it, a signal to ensure Stephen received the right glass. The poisoned glass. Time seemed to slow. She watched Stephen's hand close around the etched crystal, watched him lift it to eye level to admire the color. Around them, the crowd was quieting, sensing the traditional toast was about to begin. Someone dimmed the chandeliers. A hush fell over the ballroom. Stephen raised the glass higher, and Catherine's body made the decision her mind was still debating. She pushed through the final cluster of guests, her tray forgotten on a nearby table, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She had seconds. Maybe less. Stephen's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and associates. He brought the glass toward his lips. Catherine lunged forward, her arms swinging in an arc she had not planned, driven by pure desperate instinct. Her fist connected with the side of Stephen's face with a crack that seemed to echo through the sudden silence, and the etched crystal glass went flying, wine arcing through the air like blood, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of glass and impossible vintage. The ballroom froze. 200 people in masks stared at the poor girl in the server's uniform who had just punched the most dangerous man in New York directly in the jaw. And Catherine Stuhler, standing over the shattered glass with her hand still clenched in a fist, met Stephen Maya's shocked, murderous eyes and knew she had approximately 3 seconds to explain why she should not die. The silence lasted exactly 1 heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. Stephen's hand flew to his jaw, his eyes wide with shock that rapidly crystallized into something far more dangerous. Blood trickled from his split lip where Catherine's knuckle had caught him. Around them, the ballroom detonated into motion, security guards drawing weapons, guests screaming and scrambling backward, the orchestra's instruments screeching to a discordant halt. 4 men in dark suits materialized around Catherine before she could draw another breath, their hands iron vises on her arms, guns pressed to her ribs and the base of her skull. She did not fight them. Fighting would be pointless. Instead, she kept her eyes locked on Stephen's face, watching the shock give way to cold fury, watching him process what had just happened in front of 200 witnesses. Wait. His voice cut through the pandemonium like a blade. The room fell silent again, everyone frozen mid-motion, waiting for his judgment. He touched his bleeding lip with 1 finger, studied the blood, then looked at Catherine with eyes that promised unspeakable pain. Nobody move. Nobody leaves. Catherine's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand, but the guard's grip kept her upright. Her right hand throbbed where she had connected with his jaw. She had hit him harder than she meant to, driven by desperation and the terrible knowledge of what that wine would have done. Stephen took a step toward her, and the guards tightened their hold, ready to execute her the moment he gave the word. She could see it in their faces, the eagerness to make an example of the girl who had dared to strike their boss. Her mouth was dry as sand, her heart a trapped bird beating against her ribs. The wine, she gasped out before he could speak, before he could order her death. Don't drink the wine. It's poisoned. The words landed like stones in still water. Stephen's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes, calculation replacing rage, the predator's instinct to identify the real threat. He glanced down at the shattered glass, wine still spreading across the marble in a dark pool, crystal shards glittering like diamonds in the chandelier light. Explain. 1 word, flat and cold, carrying the weight of her life in the balance. Catherine's breath came in shallow gulps, but she forced the words out. In the pantry. I heard them. 2 men. One of them is a server here, thin, dark hair, nervous hands. She jerked her chin toward where the thin man stood frozen in the crowd, his face draining of color. He marked your glass. The etched crystal with the chip on the base. Said you always drink from it for the midnight toast. They put something in the wine. botulinum derivative. Said you would be dead before you reached your study. The thin server bolted. He made it 3 steps before Stephen's men tackled him to the ground, his scream cut short as they slammed his face into the marble. The ballroom erupted again, guests pushing toward the exits, but more guards had appeared, blocking every door. No one was leaving until Stephen decided they could. Stephen looked from the captured server back to Catherine, his eyes searching her face for any trace of deception. She met his gaze, trying not to flinch, trying not to show how terrified she was. Her entire body was trembling now, adrenaline crashing through her system, making her dizzy. There was another man, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Older. Distinguished. Guest, not staff. I saw his shoes, Italian leather. He was the one who paid for it. 50,000. I heard them in the pantry 20 minutes ago. Stephen's jaw tightened, and for a moment Catherine thought he was going to have her killed anyway, that he would decide she was part of the plot, a convenient scapegoat. But then he turned to the man on his right, the one who had been at his side all evening. Marcus. Test the wine. Now. And find me every male guest over 40 in Italian shoes. Marcus moved immediately, crouching by the spilled wine with something from his pocket, a testing kit, Catherine realized dimly. The ballroom watched in absolute silence as he ran the test, his face going pale as the results appeared. He looked up at Stephen and gave a single, sharp nod. The confirmation seemed to shift something in the air. Stephen's expression did not soften, but the murderous edge dulled slightly as he turned back to Catherine. Let her go. The guards released her arms, and she nearly collapsed, her legs threatening to give out. She locked her knees, forcing herself to stay upright, to maintain what little dignity she had left. Stephen studied her for a long moment, his hand still pressed to his bleeding jaw where she had hit him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she and his closest men could hear. You just saved my life. And assaulted me in front of half the city's elite. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. I genuinely don't know whether to thank you or kill you. Catherine's voice came out steadier than she expected. I'll take either over watching you die from poison I could have prevented. His eyebrows rose slightly, reassessing her. Then he gestured to Marcus. Take her to my study. Put her somewhere comfortable. Post guards. She doesn't leave, but she doesn't get hurt. He paused, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. Not yet, anyway. Stephen's study was all dark wooden leather, a fire crackling in the hearth despite the late hour. Catherine sat in a chair that probably cost more than her entire apartment building, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. 2 guards stood by the door, silent and still as statues, their eyes never leaving her. She had been here for 20 minutes, alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that she had made a terrible mistake. The door opened without warning. Stephen entered, his jacket removed, his white shirt marked with a few drops of wine that looked disturbingly like blood. He had cleaned his split lip, but the bruise was already forming along his jaw, dark purple spreading across the sharp line where her fist had connected. He looked at her without speaking, and Catherine found she could not hold his gaze, her eyes dropping to her hands. He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, the silence stretching until it became almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was conversational, almost pleasant. What's your name? Catherine Stula. How long have you worked for me, Catherine Stula? 6 hours. This was my first shift. Through Elite Staffing Solutions. Her voice sounded small in the vast room. Stephen took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. First shift. And you just happened to overhear a murder plot and decided to intervene by physically attacking me in front of 200 witnesses. He set the glass down with a soft click. Forgive me if I find that remarkably convenient. Catherine's head snapped up. You think I'm part of it? I think you appeared out of nowhere, at exactly the right time, with exactly the right information. He moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as broken glass. I think people have tried more elaborate schemes to get close to me. And I think the best lies are wrapped in just enough truth to seem credible. Fear spiked through her chest, but beneath it, something else rose, anger. She had saved his life. She had risked everything, and now he was accusing her of being part of the conspiracy. Then test the wine again. Question the server. Check the pantry for fingerprints. I don't care. But I'm not lying. Everyone lies to me, Catherine. He said her name like he was tasting it, deciding if he liked the flavor. The question is why. So let's find out. He pulled his phone from his pocket, typed something, then turned the screen toward her. This is your file. Catherine Ann Stula, 24 years old. Lives in the Bronx with her brother, Leo, age 16. 87,000 in debt, mostly medical and student loans. Mother deceased, father unknown. Fired from your last 3 jobs. No criminal record. He paused. You're drowning, Catherine. Desperate people do desperate things for money. The casual way he laid out her entire life made her feel naked, exposed. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Nobody does the right thing anymore. Not in my world. He set the phone aside. So I'll ask you again, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Who sent you? Nobody sent me. I needed the money for my brother's medication. That's all. Her voice cracked on the last word, frustration and exhaustion finally breaking through her composure. I don't care about your world or your wars or whatever game you people are playing. I just wanted to earn enough to keep him breathing for another month. Something shifted in Stephen's expression. He stood, walked to the window, his back to her. Your brother. Leo. Asthma. Yes. Catherine's hands clenched in her lap. Severe. Without his medication, he can't. She stopped, swallowing hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. And how much do you need? For the medication. The question caught her off guard. I don't, what does that matter? He turned back to face her, and for the first time since entering the room, his expression was something other than cold calculation. Humor me. $1,200 a month. Sometimes more if he has an attack. The words came out bitter. Which I don't have. Which is why I took this job. Stephen was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he picked up his phone again, made a call. Marcus. The brother. Leo Stula, 16, Bronx. I want a full medical workup by morning. Best pulmonologist in the city. And clear the girl's debt, all of it. Hospital, student loans, everything. He paused, listening to something on the other end. I don't care what it costs. Do it. Catherine's breath stopped. What are you? He held up one finger, silencing her. And Marcus? The apartment in the Bronx. Buy the building. Put it in her name. He ended the call, set the phone down, and finally looked at her directly. You're afraid, Catherine. I can see it. But you're not afraid of me. I am afraid of you, she whispered. No. He shook his head slowly. You're afraid for your brother. That's different. That's real. He moved closer, crouching down so they were eye level. People who are afraid of me lie to save themselves. People who are afraid for someone else tell the truth. It's one of the few reliable measures I have left. Tears burned behind Catherine's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I don't want your money. I just want to go home. Too late. Stephen stood, offering her his hand. You saved my life. That creates a debt. And I always pay my debts. His bruised jaw caught the firelight. Besides, you're the only person in this entire house I know I can trust. That's worth considerably more than $87,000. The interrogation of the thin server took less than an hour. Catherine did not witness it, but she heard the screams from where she sat in Stephen's study, guarded and protected in equal measure. When Marcus returned, his knuckles were bruised and his expression was grim. He leaned close to Stephen, whispering names Catherine could not hear, and she watched Stephen's face harden into something carved from ice. Dominic Castellano, Stephen said quietly, as if testing the name. My own cousin. For 20 years he's sat at my table. He looked at Catherine then, and she saw something dangerous and wounded in his eyes. You saved me from family. That's the worst kind of betrayal to prevent. By dawn, 5 men had been removed from the estate in black vehicles with tinted windows. Catherine did not ask where they were going. She did not want to know. The distinguished man in Italian shoes was among them, Dominic Castellano, who had smiled at Stephen during the gala while planning his murder. The thin server was gone too, along with 3 others who had known about the plot and said nothing. Stephen did not sleep. He spent the hours before sunrise on phone calls, his voice cold and efficient as he dismantled whatever remained of the conspiracy. Catherine dozed fitfully in a chair by the fire, watched over by guards who brought her coffee and pastries she was too anxious to eat. When the sun finally rose, painting the study windows gold, Stephen ended his final call and looked at her as if surprised she was still there. "I want to see it," he said abruptly. "Where you live. The brother you risked your life for." Catherine's exhaustion made her bold. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what kind of person punches a mafia boss to save him." He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "And because I'm going there anyway to make sure the boy is taken care of. You can come with me, or I can go alone. Your choice." 20 minutes later, Catherine sat in the back of a black Mercedes that probably cost more than most houses, watching the city transform as they drove from the manicured wealth of Stephen's neighborhood into the broken reality of her own. Stephen sat beside her in silence, his eyes taking in the boarded windows, the trash-lined streets, the groups of men on corners who scattered at the sight of the expensive car. When they pulled up in front of her building, Catherine saw it through his eyes, the crumbling brick facade, the broken front door hanging on one hinge, the graffiti that covered the ground floor like a desperate cry for attention. Shame burned in her chest, hot and bitter, but she lifted her chin and met his gaze. "This is it. Still want to come inside?" Stephen's expression was unreadable. "Lead the way." The stairwell smelled of urine and mildew. The lights were out on the second floor. Catherine's footsteps echoed against concrete as she climbed to the 3rd floor, Stephen and 2 of his guards following behind. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight, could imagine what they were thinking about the life she lived. She unlocked the door to her apartment, and her heart nearly stopped. Leo sat on the couch, his eyes wide with terror at the sight of the men in expensive suits crowding into their tiny living room. He signed frantically, his hands shaking. "Cat, who are they? What's happening?" Catherine rushed to him, signing back as she spoke aloud for Stephen's benefit. "It's okay. They are not here to hurt us. I promise." She turned to Stephen, positioning herself between him and her brother. "This is Leo. Leo, this is Mr. Maya." Stephen stood in the center of the room, and Catherine saw the apartment through his eyes. The stained walls, the broken radiator, the patched furniture that had been old when they found it on the street. The refrigerator that hummed too loud. The window covered with cardboard where the glass had broken and they could not afford to replace it. The whole of their life laid bare in 400 square feet of poverty. But Stephen was not looking at the apartment. He was looking at Leo, at the boy's thin frame and the inhaler clutched in his hand, at the fear in his eyes that was not for himself but for his sister. Catherine watched something shift in Stephen's face. Not pity, exactly, but something like recognition. "Your sister saved my life last night," Stephen said, his voice gentler than Catherine had heard it. "She's very brave." Leo's hands moved in quick signs. Catherine translated, her voice thick. "He says I'm also very stupid for getting involved with dangerous people." A ghost of a smile touched Stephen's lips. "He's not wrong." He pulled out his phone, made another call. "Marcus. I'm at the address. Send the medical team now. And a crew to fix this place. New windows, new everything. I want it livable by tonight." He paused, looking around the room again. "Actually, no. Find them a new apartment. Something in a building with working heat and doors that lock. Move them today." Catherine's breath caught. "Mr. Maya, you can't." "I can, and I am." He ended the call, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse skip. "You gave me my life back, Catherine. The least I can do is give you a life worth living." He looked at Leo again, then back to her. "But there's a condition." Of course there was. Catherine's stomach tightened. "What condition?" "You work for me. Not as a server. As someone I can trust." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Last night proved that everyone around me is either afraid of me, wants to use me, or wants me dead. You're the first person in years who risked something real with no agenda. I need that. I need someone who tells me the truth. I don't know anything about your world." "Good. That makes you perfect." He extended his hand. 1 year. You work for me, I take care of your brother, clear your debts, set you up somewhere safe. After that, if you want to walk away, you walk away. Free and clear. Catherine looked at his offered hand, then at Leo, who was watching her with those two old eyes that had seen too much suffering. She thought about the medication he needed, the life he deserved, the choices that had led her to this impossible moment. She took Stephen's hand. 1 year. His grip was firm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. Welcome to the family, Catherine. Try not to punch me again. 6 months later, Catherine stood in the grand hall of the Iron Rose, but this time she was not invisible. She wore a dress that cost more than she used to make in a year, deep emerald silk that skimmed her frame like water, her hair swept up to reveal the diamond earrings Stephen had given her after she successfully negotiated a truce between two warring factions he had been ready to destroy. She had convinced him that peace was more profitable than war, had shown him the numbers until he relented. It was the first time she had openly disagreed with him. It would not be the last. The guests who filled the hall for tonight's charity gala were the same people who had witnessed her punch Stephen 6 months ago. But they did not look through her anymore. They watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination, whispering behind their champagne glasses about the poor girl from the Bronx who had become Stephen Meyer's most trusted advisor. His right hand. Some whispered other titles too, though those were wrong. What existed between Catherine and Stephen was far more complicated than romance, built on a foundation of brutal honesty and hard-earned trust. Stephen appeared at her elbow, immaculate in a black suit, the scar on his jaw from where she had hit him barely visible now. He had never had it fixed. Said it reminded him that the people closest to you were the most dangerous, and sometimes the most valuable. You look nervous, he observed, handing her a glass of champagne. I'm always nervous at these things. She accepted the glass but did not drink. Old habits died hard. I keep expecting someone to ask me to refill their champagne. Let them try. His voice carried an edge that made her smile despite herself. You outrank most of the people in this room now. They just don't know it yet. It was true, though Catherine still struggled to accept it. Stephen had made good on every promise. Leo lived in a penthouse apartment with round-the-clock medical care, attending a private school where his intelligence finally had room to flourish. His asthma was managed by the best specialists in the country. He was thriving in ways Catherine had not dared to dream. Her debts were gone, erased as if they had never existed. The building where they used to live had been demolished, replaced by affordable housing that Stephen funded anonymously. Catherine had insisted on that. If he was going to spend money on their old neighborhood, it should help everyone, not just them. And Catherine herself had transformed in ways that had nothing to do with the expensive clothes or the apartment she now kept in Stephen's building. She had found her voice. The girl who had learned to be invisible had discovered she had a talent for seeing what others missed, for reading people and situations with a clarity that came from years of watching from the margins. Stephen relied on her judgment now, trusted her instincts, listened when she challenged him. Dominic's nephew is here tonight, Stephen said quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd. Third table from the left. He requested an invitation. Catherine followed his gaze, found the young man in question. And you let him come? I wanted to see what he would do. Whether he would seek revenge or reconciliation. Stephen's expression was unreadable. Your guess. Catherine studied the nephew, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to Stephen and then away. Reconciliation. He's terrified. But he's also alone now. His family is gone. He needs what you can offer more than he needs revenge. Agreed. Stephen sipped his drink. Go talk to him. Make him understand the terms. It was a test. It was always a test with Stephen. But Catherine had stopped resenting the tests months ago, once she realized they were his way of showing respect. He only tested people he believed could pass. She set down her champagne and moved through the crowd with the confidence that had grown from necessity into something real. The nephew's eyes widened as she approached, recognition and fear warring on his face. Miss Stula. I didn't expect. Mr. Meyer is willing to meet with you, Catherine said, her voice low and firm. But you need to understand something first. What your uncle did, what he tried to do, that's done. Buried. If you want a future with this family, it starts clean. No revenge. No debt. No looking back. Can you accept those terms? The young man swallowed hard, nodded. Yes. I just want a chance. That's all. Catherine saw the desperation in his eyes, recognized it from her own reflection 6 months ago. Then you'll get one. But only one. Don't waste it. She walked back to Stephen, who had watched the entire exchange with those calculating eyes that missed nothing. Well,